Hi, everyone. Welcome. So today I've been following the Supreme Court rulings for over the last 2 days, and I'm hoping that you are too. I had a lot of questions and been looking pretty closely at it. And if you haven't, I have because I think it's important to call attention to what's happening. The Supreme Court, at the very least, has strayed from upholding the law and identifying the constitutional from the unconstitutional. Instead, it appears to be working as a kangaroo court that twists the words of the Constitution and legal analysis into a sort of mind game to support the whims of the deranged and dying fascist in the White House. It's not hard to see and it's easy to understand. But for me, I wanted to take some time with what has already been decided. I think there is enough good, bad, and ugly to go around. And while I've been watching, I've seen over the past 2 days, the Supreme Court has issued a cluster of decisions. Taken together, they reshape the balance of power in this country. And so people, these rulings touch voting rights, presidential authority, surveillance, and equal protection. And while each case has its own legal logic, the pattern is unmistakable. It's not random. It sure as hell is not neutral, and it's not even technically sound. Much of the decisions are based on twisting words or phrases to change the balance of power. It's a part of a long American story about who gets protected, who gets covered, who gets counted, and who gets control. And if we want to understand the civil rights implications of all of these rulings taken together, we have to be honest about the history that they echo. Because the Constitution we live under today was shaped not only by the founders, but by the Confederacy, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and every backlash that followed. This week's decisions fit into that lineage. They expand executive power, they narrow voting access, they weaken independent agencies, and carve out exceptions to equal protection. And every one of these moves has a civil rights consequence. So let's walk through what happened and why it matters. Over Monday and Tuesday, the court issued several rulings. It upheld stricter absentee ballots in Mississippi, requiring ballots to be postmarked by Election Day. It expanded presidential power to remove officials at independent agencies like the Federal Reserve, the Federal Trade Commission. And what this means, all this means, is that Trump is more powerful now than when he was a few days ago. He previously could not remove federal officials. That could only happen when they had committed an egregious act. Now Trump can remove them at will. Next, it ruled on a case involving transgender participation in sports, narrowing the scope of equal protection. This reduces the protection of transgender people, made it easier for states to justify laws that exclude transgender athletes, signaled that gender identity may not be treated the same as transgender as it is for everyone else under the Constitution. So, what they were saying was that a transgender identity is now not treated the same as what previously we would call it hetero um, gender. Next, it allowed broad use of something called geofence warrants. Geofence warrants are digital warrants that cover a broad area geographically and in in a technical area, allowing police access to digital location data that can sweep thousands of people. So that's surveillance. They're technically allowing surveillance for police to access our locations without a warrant, just so they can just access our location. using this technology and without our permission. And this one and the next one, it's really important. It issued a campaign finance ruling that loosens restrictions on political committees. This means more money coming in from PACs and dark money meaning hidden not-for-profits. Each of these decisions touch a different part of American life, but together they form a constitutional pattern, more power to executives and states and less protection for individuals. To understand the civil rights impact of these rulings, I wanted to go back and look at the Confederacy, not because I have a fetish for the Confederacy or not because I want to relitigate the Civil War, but because the Confederacy left behind a constitutional blueprint that still shapes American law. There's a straight line from the Confederacy, which had its own ratified constitution and its own president, to the present. And the storm that's happened, this storm is happening as I speak. This through line has carried all the way to the present day. The Confederacy's project was built on 3 pillars: states' right as a shield for inequity, weak federal protection for individuals, and centralized executive power when it served the hierarchy. States' rights shield for inequality the Confederacy using states' rights, obviously, as a shield, even more like a dog whistle. And it would be more accurate to decide who counts as a person, who can vote, and who has rights. The Confederacy used state rights to determine who counted as a person. They made up their own laws about who counted as a person. They made up their own laws about who can vote, and they used language like local control, state sovereignty as a political cover, the actual dog whistle for slavery. And not just then, it's used in the same manner now. So states' rights has always been used since the time of the Confederacy as a dog whistle to say we want to control the civil rights of people of color, and we want to go back and roll back to a time when slavery was legal. In the Confederacy Constitution, slavery was legalized. It was determined by each state how far they took it, what rights Black people had or didn't have, and really they weren't going to free any slaves. All the states were going to continue to have slavery as a legalized form of economic engine. The states' rights were just, so how are we going to enforce this? How are we going to keep Black people under our thumb and follow the rules that we have decided are sovereign? The weak federal protection for individuals that the Confederacy used was the Constitution limited federal power, elevated state authority, especially over civil rights questions. The states had greater agency in creating and enforcing laws, and this gave states the power to legislate and enforce or not enforce civil rights as they wish. In other words, lynching, the Ku Klux Klan, they could legitimize those groups. Civil rights laws varied from state to state. Slavery was legal and protected. And the third thing the Confederacy did was to centralize executive power when it served the hierarchy. The Confederate president had strong control over the executive branch, including military and administrative functions. He could call out the army as he saw fit. He had more power over who he could appoint to positions. In other words, he controlled who was going to be on the streets patrolling, how they were going to handle the law. And the law could be anything that they wanted. The law could be the way you looked at people. The law could be the way you addressed people. And then they had the president, who was the executive authority over how that was going to be executed. After the Civil War, Reconstruction tried to reverse all of this. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment were designed to nationalize civil rights, to make equality a federal guarantee. But the backlash, what historians called redemption, used courts, state legislators, and administrative power to hollow out those guarantees while claiming constitutional legitimacy. And that's the through line to today. When redemption used courts, state legislatures, and administrative power to hollow out guarantees while claiming constitutional legitimacy, we see a return to that. Instead of relying on federally mandated civil rights, that all men are free, that women have the right, black men, black women have the right to vote, white women have the right to vote. We have birthright guaranteed in the Constitution. It's guaranteed in the Constitution in the 14th Amendment. So when the court has to decide on things like birthright citizenship, it should be a 9-0 decision, because in the Constitution it says that once you're born in the United States, you're a United States citizen automatically. So when the court has 3 dissenters on that, those people are Confederates because they're breaking with the Constitution. And that's why the court's decisions were so important today. And that's why it's important to know who voted, what they voted, why they voted. And the fact that one person decided he was going to make up his own rules, he's going to have like a half and half, Kavanaugh saying, oh, well, I'm going to do halvesies. I'm going to kind of like say the right thing because I know I'll cast my vote for the Constitution. But then on the other hand, I'm going to kind of wink and nod at that. And I'm just going to say, well, really, it's okay if the president wants to come in and just use his executive power to overwrite the Constitution. That's okay too. That's Confederacy. And it's just what I was just talking about. When the president has all the executive power and he can just write into law whatever he wants, that was the Confederacy, because we already have a Constitution that clearly states that once you're born in this country, you are a citizen. Okay, so I'm going to go on. So before I get off on a diatribe, but I thought it was valiant anyway. When the court defers to states on voting rules, when it extends presidential control over independent agencies, when it narrows equal protection, when it permits broad surveillance powers, it is echoing that same old constitutional tension. Will civil rights be protected nationally, or will they be left to the states and the executive? And if that happens, they take away all the power from us. We can't make our own rules, and the president just can call the shots as he will, and the states can decide how they want to do things on their own. So we'll have a hodgepodge of laws like we have now, and we'll have one person who thinks he can run everything and make up laws for the entire United States on his own willy-nilly without consent from us, the people. And that's because that's why the legislative branch is Congress and Senate, because they represent us. Senators represent us on a state level. The Congress represents us on a local level. So if you really want the Congress to know what you want, you have to go to your congressman. If you want them to know, and that means at your local level in your district, but then you have to get enough people in Congress to vote separately and together. Because if Congress votes for the independent people in their district and they all band together, they can have a larger vote. They stand for their individual districts, but they can still come together and move things in a particular way. So that's why it's really, really important to vote in the primary so you get the candidate that you want. And then it's really important to follow that up and go out there and vote for your congressional member, even if you kind of don't like them, because where the power lies in how much they can come together and vote en masse. Senators, they represent us at a Senate at a wider viewpoint, but they can still come together and make rulings for us, and they also have power to work to pass bills. And it's really important that they work together as a team. Right now, for the Democrats, it's really important that the senators and congressmen work together as a team, that they decide what it is that what are their priorities, and we need to tell them what their priorities are. It is up to us to demand action from Congress and action from the Senate. Okay, I digress. So voting rights, as I've been sort of laying out, is the gateway right. The court's decision to uphold stricter absentee ballot rules may sound procedural, but voting is foundational. Voting is the gateway right. If you can't vote, you can't defend any other right. And that's where the SAVE Act comes in. Because if the president gets his way, women who have changed their name will not be able to vote unless they can provide a passport. And there's a whole bunch of other things that have been written into the SAVE Act to prevent you from voting. That's his whole game. He doesn't want you to vote. He wants to rig the election so that he can continue to wield executive power and make up his own rules. That's just all there is to it. He just wants to make up his own rules. He doesn't want Congress involved, because if Congress gets involved, we're going to rise up and take away his right to play games with us and steal all our money. And that's the bottom line. He wants to steal all our money. He wants to stay out of jail. And if he could only do that if we let him. Historically, and they didn't vote on a separation of church and state, and that's why I haven't brought it up in this one, but I'm right there agreeing with anybody who's talking about separation of church and state. It's the same exact kind of concept. Historically, when states gain more control over voting access, marginalized communities lose access first. Black voters, Indigenous voters, disabled voters, elderly voters, poor voters, and women voters. That's the modern version of the Confederacy state. The states decide who votes philosophy. This modern version may seem a little cleaner and quieter, and it may have a little bit better language. It's not going right out there and saying, certain kinds of people and using certain kinds of names. But I mean, if you listen to our president, it's the Confederate language, plain and simple. Same thing. There's no light between what the president says and what the Confederates were saying. But in terms of Congress and the Senate, they use a lot of dog whistles, and they try to keep their language clean so that it sounds nice and it sounds like it's not racist and it sounds acceptable. But if you listen carefully, they're just as wrapped up in the Confederate flag as Donald Trump is, and that's why he's got a lot of them on his side. Anyway, it may be wrapped up in nice language, but the effect is the same. Some voices matter less. And this is the dangerous part, because most of us fit one or more of those categories. It's a loaded gun aimed right at us. The court's rulings expanding presidential removal power may seem like inside baseball governance, but they have enormous civil rights implications. Independent agencies enforce civil rights laws. They regulate discrimination, labor rights, consumer protection, and fair competition. If those officials can be fired for political reasons, civil rights enforcement becomes partisan and fragile. This echoes the Confederates' model. Strong executive control when it serves hierarchy, weak federal protection when individuals need it. The court's decision involving transgender participation in sports is part of a broader trend, narrowing equal protection for trans Americans. Civil rights history teaches us that every era picks a group to mark as other people. Black people, immigrants, disabled people, queer people, trans people, and then uses laws to rationalize exclusion. The Confederacy legally defined Black people as less than fully human. Today's laws that carve out trans people as exceptions to equality are part of that same hierarchical logic. Some bodies are legitimate, others are negotiable. The court's acceptance of broad geofence warrants expands government surveillance power. Surveillance has never been neutral. It has historically targeted Black people, communities, activists, immigrants, and dissidents. Digital surveillance can chill protest, organizing, and attending certain events. This is a high-tech echo of slave patrols, black codes, and Jim Crow policing systems designed to monitor and control marginalized communities. When the court expands surveillance power, it is not just deciding a Fourth Amendment question, it is deciding who gets watched. Loosening restrictions on political committees strengthens the influence of money in politics. And money in politics has always had civil rights consequences. Those with resources shaping the laws, those without fight to be heard. This is not new. It is a part of the same constitutional struggle over whose voice carries weight. These rulings matter because they touch the everyday realities of civil rights. Voting, identity, protection, privacy, and power. Voting harder access means fewer voices in the democratic process. The identity, trans people face legal barriers to participation and recognition. Not only that, the indigenous folks and Black poor people who have a harder time getting a passport or a state ID, they're affected too. They face barriers getting to the polls and participating and being recognized and having their voices heard. Protection, independent agencies may become political tools rather than guardians or rights or guardians of rights. And independent agencies are supposed to be protectors, but in certain cases, independent agencies, such as church groups, other types of groups, impede our civil rights progress. And then there's privacy. Surveillance can track who attends protests, clinics, or community meetings. And when they can track who attends protests, clinics, or community meetings, obviously that means they can interfere with them, they can target them. And then, of course, power. And we all know about AIPAC and how AIPAC has been able to influence most of our leaders, and especially on the Democratic side. So money and executive authority shape whose rights are enforced by how they can control the monetary flow to our representatives. Civil rights are not abstract. They are lived, and they depend on institutions that are willing and able to protect them. Right now, most of the institutions that are protecting them are things like Democracy Defenders and Democracy Docket and other organizations that are outside of the government, but that have been built by independent people, independent individuals. Oh, I'm sorry. Settle. Okay, thanks for waiting. Okay, I'm going to start to wrap this up. The Confederacy did lose a war, but it left behind a constitutional philosophy, a blueprint for how to hollow out rights while claiming to honor the Constitution. This week's Supreme Court decision fit into that blueprint. More power to executives and states, less protection for the vulnerable. And here's the truth. Civil rights are not self-executing. They depend on courts, agencies, voters, and communities who insist that the Constitution is a floor, not a ceiling. If the court is handing power back to the states, then state and local elections become frontline civil rights battles. If the court is expanding executive authority, then oversight and accountability become essential. If the court is narrowing equal protection, then solidarity becomes a civil rights strategy. We are living through a constitutional turning point, and the question is the same one America has faced since Reconstruction. Will we build a nation where rights are national, equal, and protected, or one where they depend on who you are and where you live? That is the civil rights question of our time, and it is a question these rulings force us to confront. This is where we are, folks. It's the week of our 250th anniversary, and the Supreme Court is seriously punching the clock for a unitary executive and removal of secret civil rights. The mother effers who do intend to take away our rights. The decisions made over the last month or two prove it. They can put as much lipstick on a pig as they want, but a pig is still a pig. Don't let them take away your rights. Vote. Just vote. Get out and protest. But more importantly, let your voice be heard and vote. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night. Just breathe, and you can find me on Substack at obimaya.substack.com, and all my handles are Just Breathe. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.